Zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. Run in a random swervy pattern, and you're less likely to be hit by the arrow. Why aren't you wearing a helmet? Even Jon Snow doesn't have a helmet. That's pretty stupid. Hi, I'm Matt Easton of Scholar Gladiator, and I teach people how to use swords, and I also give advice to people who make movies and also museums and things like that as well. Today, I'm going to be looking at the Battle of the Bastards from Game of Thrones. So looking at this, one of the first things I absolutely loved about the Battle of the Bastards is at the beginning, we see two armies facing each other. They're quite a distance apart. They're beyond bowshot, which is absolutely realistic. In the medieval period, particularly in the 100 Years' War between the English and the French, we see there's a tentative moving towards each other of armies into crossbow and longbow range. And this is quite critical because obviously if you can outrange the enemy, then that's a major tactical advantage. And this can rely on the direction of the wind, or in some cases even snow, or the lay of the land as well if one side's a bit higher than the other. So picking a strategic position, and what we see here with Jon Snow's army is it has the woods behind it. That's really, really cool. And that's again something we absolutely find in lots of medieval battles, because very often armies would try to position themselves on high ground if they possibly could, but also with woods preferably behind them, and if possible to the sides, to the flanks as well, because this would protect them from sudden flanking attacks, particularly from cavalry. That most famously was done at the Battle of Agincourt, where Henry V positioned his army probably on slightly raised ground, but certainly with woods to the flanks to protect their archers from the French cavalry. Very good positioning. I like the way that they've actually thought about that and shown that in this scene. The other thing I absolutely love is you can see defined units. So medieval or classical world type armies tend to have formations of kinds, because if you've got prepared soldiers, then you're going to put them into units to perform specific functions, and also they might be tribal units or they might be under separate commanders. So for moving around on the battlefield and command and control, it's also very, very useful. So many people without helmets. And these are like, even commanders are sitting there on their horses without helmets. You can afford armor. You've got loads of money. Why aren't you wearing a helmet? Even Jon Snow doesn't have a helmet. So there's another elephant in the room here aside from the giant, and that is the fact that we've got a huge army here. They don't have helmets on. That's pretty stupid. Not many of them have shields either. Why? These are the most fundamental, typical things in the medieval period. If you look at, even if you go back to the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the most fundamental weapons of war are the bow, the spear, the helmet, and the shield. And those things dominated battlefields for literally thousands of years. We don't see an awful lot of spears here. We don't see hardly any helmets, a very small number of helmets. We see a small number of shields. There should be more representation of these things. There should be more long pole arms. There should be certainly more helmets, and absolutely should be more shields. If I was a medieval commander and I looked at this army, I'd look at it and I'd think, right, bring the archers up, and you just shoot them to pieces with archers, because they don't have shields, they don't have helmets. So they're absolutely just going to get completely wiped out by a relatively small force of archers standing 300 yards away. So we get to the elephant in the room, which is Wun Wun the Giant. I've had quite a few conversations with people about Wun Wun the Giant, and it's, if you had a giant in your army, how would you use it? And unfortunately, I don't think that they've represented it very well in this particular battle. Fundamentally, they've got a massive target who's going to be an absolute magnet for arrows. Admittedly, normal strength human bows are not going to penetrate particularly deeply on a giant, and he's wearing this padded armor, essentially winter clothing as well. He's not going to be killed by one arrow or anything like that unless it happens to hit him in the brain or in the eye or something like the throat or something like this. So apart from being a big target, he's standing right up the front, and he doesn't really have anything to protect him. I would have really liked to see him with some form of shield. If they had given Wun Wun a shield, he would have been an unstoppable machine of death. And I cannot conceive how Ramsay's army would have stopped Wun Wun the Giant had he had a shield. But there we go. He doesn't have a shield. So what weapons he got? he doesn't really have a weapon. What are they thinking? They've put basically an unarmed giant up at the front as a arrow magnet, and he's basically unarmed. Yeah, of course, he's still going to be dangerous. He can still stomp on things and smash things. But why not just give him a really big stick, or as one person suggested to me, a scythe? Why not make him a giant scythe and he can go there sweeping through all the enemy horses? He could have been used so much more effectively, even just throwing rocks. He's like a bionic catapult, isn't he? A trebuchet. It really bugged me how poorly they used the giant. Zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. Run in a random swervy pattern, and you're less likely to be hit by the arrow. For anyone who doesn't do archery, that is an incredibly long-range shot, like above Olympic level degree of accuracy, bearing in mind, and this is with a simple bow as well, so there's no sights, there's no modern technology involved. That would be, in the historical world, an absolutely exemplary shot. Also, as a minor point of interest, the degree of penetration is about right. So you'd expect an arrow from an average power bow, so maybe 60 to 80 pound draw weight bow, would put an arrow about that far through someone's torso if they're not wearing any kind of armor. Strategically, tactically, drawing your sword, facing a line of oncoming horsemen, do you stand any chance? None at all. None at all. Even if he had a more appropriate weapon to face a horseman, for example, a spear, a pike, a halberd, at best you would bring down one horseman, but against a line of horsemen, you're just going to get bowled over. So, I mean, that was the only way he was going to survive, wasn't it? And I think it's a really nice graphical representation of what it may have looked like when two sets of horsemen collide, as has happened through hundreds of years of history. If they're both moving at 20, 30 miles an hour, that's an impact speed of 40 to 60 miles an hour, which frankly for humans and horses is horrific, and you've got lances and swords and other things involved as well. So yeah, absolutely brutal, and John was very lucky that they got there on time. So Ramsay's decision to shoot into the melee is obviously one which typifies his character. He's utterly ruthless. Tactically, maybe it's the right decision. I'll let you make the judgment call, the moral call here. But in a medieval world where you want to win the battle by losing the fewest number of your men as possible, what Ramsay did there was he committed his cavalry. Okay, so they're already in a melee. Some of them are already dead. What he hasn't yet committed are his archers, his infantry, the majority of his army. I mean, you could say that maybe 7/8 of his army is standing next to him. And it might cause all sorts of uprisings and mutinies on your own side by shooting your own men. Absolutely. It could come back to bite you in the behind further down the line. But at the moment, he's made the decision to kill some of his men, but also kill a bunch of the enemy as well, including, of course, where Jon Snow is, and therefore he might kill the enemy commander. Medieval armies revolve around their commanders, around their figureheads, their banners. So it's difficult to make modern moral judgments on these kind of decisions, and I think tactically, Ramsay made the right choice. So this, of course, was all part of Ramsay's master plan. He's encircled Jon Snow's army, and he's using shields now. Isn't it great to finally see shields? So these types of shields, these very tall rectangular shields, are most akin to a type of shield we would call a pavis. Now, pavis were very popular in the 15th century. They're quite heavy and they're quite thick, but the pavises, as we see here, could also be used in a similar way to how the Romans used to use their shields. The Roman shield, called a scutum, is similar to this in essence. It's usually more curved and it's not quite as tall as a pavis in general, but nevertheless it's used to form a wall. So what they've done is they've formed, think of it like a mobile fortification. This is often how the Romans used their testudo. So they make a complete wall formation of shields, and if there were arrows coming in, they could even put the shields on the top as well and be completely protected. The Romans would use that offensively offensively against pike blocks, but they'd also use it defensively as well. In this case, we've seen it used as an encircling tactic, and this is in the modern world, you'd most commonly see this with riot police. So the modern riot police literally got this idea from looking at historical tactics, and this is kettling, essentially, we call it in the UK. So this is medieval fantasy kettling to encircle Jon Snow's army. And obviously Jon Snow's army also, as well as being encircled, has also been shot to pieces with arrows. Lots of them are dead, and they're exhausted and bloodied. So I actually think the guys throwing themselves against the shields, that's not a bad tactic, because obviously you then get inside of the pikes, get as close as you can to the shield. And if you grab the shield, well, now the opponent's holding a shield, but so are you. You're now behind the shield as well. And this is one of the things about shields, is that once you grab them, they can actually become an obstacle to the person using the shield as well. So getting up to shield range, stabbing around the sides, stabbing under, some opening to exploit and get in amongst those pikemen. So given that he said, yeah, let's do one-on-one combat, but then started shooting arrows at him, that's not really how one-on-one combat works, Ramsay. At that point, in reality, I would have expected all of the people standing around who are looking at him going, well, that's not the rules for a duel. That's not one-on-one combat. You've got a whole bunch of arrows and you're standing quite some distance away, and they probably would have shot him. Everyone, I guess, knows that Jon Snow wants to finish Ramsay himself. Does he make a good decision grabbing a shield? Yes. However, does he make a good decision grabbing it with two hands? Well, as someone who spends a lot of time with a sword in my hand, I initially thought, hold on, why did you just drop your sword? Why didn't you just pick up the shield? You know, shields are designed to be used in one hand or one arm. Why not keep holding your sword? The only possible excuse I can make for Jon, if we want to find a logical reason to explain why he did that, was arrows do actually penetrate shields. So I guess there's some inherent risk to using the shield one-handed and going in with the sword, because the arrow might penetrate your arm behind the shield. By holding the shield further away from your body, it doesn't matter that the arrow's sticking a bit through the shield, because it's still far away from your body. Nevertheless, that's kind of an excuse. Overall, I said he should have kept his sword in his hand, but I guess it's because they wanted to see Ramsay beaten down in a more elaborate and I guess a slower way. If Jon had kept holding his sword, he could have just run straight at Ramsay and run him through the body, and that would have been the end, and that wouldn't have been so fun for the viewers, I guess. So something I've really loved about the Battle of the Bastards is that they show tactics at play. And so often when we watch movies set in the medieval period or a fantasy medieval period or the ancient world, it's just two big blobs of troops. They run at each other for some reason. They're in all nice formations, and then they all run in a big mass, and then they crash into each other, and then it breaks into lots of individual fights. I hate that, and I love the fact that that's not what they did in Game of Thrones here. They actually showed an understandable narrative, a story, and a plan. They showed that Ramsay had a plan, and that's what people do. If you're going to go and fight in war, you're going to fight a battle, you have a plan. Hopefully you have some idea for how you're going to defeat the opponent's army. So, you know, he lured Jon out, then he lured the enemy cavalry out, he then shot the enemy cavalry to pieces, sacrificing some of his own men in the process, and then he thereby luring out the enemy's infantry, which he then encircled with his infantry. There was an understandable narrative. The wild card that got thrown in was Sansa turning up, which he hadn't planned for. In medieval battles, whether it's, you know, the 100 Years' War, the Wars of the Roses, the Hussite Wars, any of these big famous late medieval campaigns that we could compare with here, what would have most normally happened is that Ramsay would have known that Sansa's army was coming. How would he have known? Scouts. And scouts were incredibly important. And, you know, news, messengers. It's very difficult to secretly move with an army of hundreds or thousands of men without someone reporting it and the news getting to you. So how did Sansa's army get there without Ramsay knowing? Your answer's as good as mine. I don't know. The fact is, normally Ramsay would have heard news that Sansa was on the move and had an army in the area, earlier. And at the battlefield, he would have had scouts posted around. Had this panned out like a historical battle of the 14th, 15th, or 16th centuries, Ramsay should have got news about Sansa's army coming before they came. However, he didn't. So presumably he was so cocky, so sure of himself that he forgot to post scouts. What a schoolboy error.
Looking for more expert reacts with Matt Easton? Make sure to check out his reaction to the Obi-Wan Kenobi series or the animated Clone Wars series.